Welcome back to the Shine Within podcast. Becky Upchurch is a dedicated coach who empowers women to craft lives they love by confidently saying no without fear or guilt. Specializing in mindset, Becky thrives on discussing and teaching simple, effective strategies for sustainable change. Known for her natural storytelling abilities, she engages audiences with her unique perspective, seamlessly blending candor, thoughtfulness, and levity into her conversations. Becky's approach is straightforward and relatable, focusing on the realities of life's challenges and the best ways to move forward. She excels in guiding her clients through easy to implement solutions, ensuring they understand and can act on her advice effectively. Thank you so much for being on my show today, Becky. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes, it's nice to meet you too. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, me too. Because we are just talking about before we hit record, how can we uplift more women so they can be their true selves, authentic selves, without feeling sad about it, feeling shame, feeling guilt, So I'm happy to talk to you. So definitely welcome to the show. And can you just go ahead and start and tell us a little bit about your journey into coaching, particularly focusing on empowering women?
So I came to coaching through the world of education. I was a classroom teacher, and then I left the classroom to become an instructional coach. And that's where I really delved into the world of coaching. And through that, I just fell in love with coaching in general. And I started really thinking about the applications for coaching outside of the classroom, outside of the world of education. And I enrolled in an ICF accredited coach training program. And from there, I started my business, and I'm always fascinated with how people's brains work, why we do the things we do, why we don't do sometimes the things we should do or wish we were doing. And I started noticing kind of a specific set of, for lack of a better word, symptoms among women. Certain behaviors, certain struggles, certain things that were really common themes that kept coming up. And I decided a couple of years ago that I really wanted to focus my work on working with women, because I felt like there was a need for women to be supported in ways that they maybe weren't being supported or being socialized into. And so I think that that was kind of what led to my passion for working specifically with women. And then getting into the boundaries work has been a more recent adventure. That actually started toward the end of last year. I just had this epiphany one day. I can't even remember now. I think I was either on a coaching call with one of my coaches, or I heard her saying something, and it was kind of in the realm of women struggling to say no. And I just kind of had this aha with, oh yeah, a lot of people do struggle with that. Maybe that's something I should talk about more, because that's one of my superpowers. And so that it kind of transitioned into this idea of, even when women do, have the strategies or the tools to say no, still have all of these terribly guilty feelings, or we have fear around it, or we have all of this mental struggle around it that really makes it almost painful for us. And I hate that, because I think that I joke around all the time. Curse words aside, no is my favorite word. And so I feel like I want more people to use it more often.
Yes, there's a book called You Had Me at No.
Oh, I
And
like that. I'm gonna write that down.
and oh my goodness, it's because we are afraid. Like for me, growing up, I was a big people pleaser, starting at who knows, probably kindergarten. And I just wanted to make sure everybody around me was happy, even though I was miserable. Let me do this for you. I will then volunteer myself. And then everyone knew that, oh, we'll just ask Gina, she'll do it for you. It took a long time for me to finally say no. And it's such a simple word, and man, what power I felt, and how much more liberated I felt when I was finally saying no. But I'm not saying it meanly, like, no, forget you. No, I just say, you know what, not this time. I'm so sorry. I'm busy right now. And no, you can even leave out the sorry part. You don't even need to say sorry. Just say, I'm sorry. You see the conditioning, right?
Yeah,
That's the
100%.
conditioning. Now, this is an example of how many times I've actually worked with a mindset coach. You still have that conditioned mindset inside there of I'm sorry, or feeling bad about it. But sometimes you just gotta
Mhm.
say no.
Yeah, and it's because I think, to your point, especially as women growing up, many of us are socialized to be people pleasers. And so we're taught that if and when you do have to, say no in those extreme situations where you can't people please, that you should apologize or that you should feel guilty. And I think that's why so many women struggle with the concept, because I think that we're kind of taught that there are two kinds of people. There are people who are accommodating, and then there are people who are not kind. And we don't realize that saying no and being a good person are not mutually exclusive. You can be the nicest person in the world and say no all the time. And so helping women to understand that saying no is not a metric of your worth. You're not less worthy because you decline things. You're not, less of a partner or a friend or a mother or a daughter or a coworker or an employee or whatever, the situation may call for. You're not any less as that thing if you say no. And in fact, sometimes saying no enables you to be a better version of whatever it is you're trying to be in the world.
Yes, and I've accepted people telling me no too, because before I would get offended, like back in my previous life, to say that, I would be offended if someone said no. But recently, my husband and I went on a Hawaii trip without kids, we had them all taken care of and everything. But I had my cat. Who's going to take care of my cat while I'm gone, right? And so I had asked my mom, I said, Mom, I know you don't like cats, but would you mind coming in, popping in to check on Zim once in a while? And then she's like, no, I won't be able to do that. I have a lot of things going on, and this is that. And I'm like, hey, good for her, because she was a people pleaser as well. And I was actually happy for her. I'm like, at first I was like, oh, my mom said no to me because, she's my mom. Normally they say yes, right? But I was like, good for her. And great. I have another solution, which then I checked out rover.com. It's where it's like Uber. It's like an Uber. It's like Uber, but for pets. You find somebody, they come to your house, and then they take care of your pet for however many hours you want them there. It's really neat. But anyway, I was just very excited that she said no. And at first I would have gotten offended back then, but I was very happy. I was like, good.
Yeah.
But anyway, in your experience, what are some common barriers that prevent women from setting effective boundaries, and how do you guide them to overcome these obstacles?
So I think the number one thing we just kind of talked about, which is they struggle to set a boundary because they think that people who create boundaries are not as kind as humans, or maybe they are less loving people, because we're taught that, oh, if you love somebody, you want to go out of your way to make them happy, right? You want to be, saying yes to helping them. You want to be saying yes to showing up for them. And so that's number one barrier, is just that mental kind of image we have of what it means to be a person who says no. I think sometimes it's also really hard, to your point, most people don't like to hear no, right? Even if we know it's better for the person to say no to us, it can be hard to receive. So I think one of the other major struggles is not even in setting the boundary, it's in holding the boundary, because we might be able to say no. And then as soon as that person looks disappointed, or as soon as that person maybe says, oh, but it's only for an hour, or, oh, but I really could use your help, or, oh, but we do it every year, or, oh, but this is, just a one-time project I need help on, whatever the, reason is, people will say things like that, right? And they're not saying that necessarily to purposefully push back or to be aggressive towards us. But for a lot of people, and I would argue women in particular, as soon as we establish that no, and then we get a little bit of a response that feels like pushback, we immediately cave. And it's like, somebody might say, oh, but I was really hoping to see you. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll come. Maybe I can't stay the whole time, but I'll show up. Or, well, maybe I can move some things around and help out with that. Or, yeah, maybe I can just do it one more time. We offer to accommodate. And so I think getting out of that habit, and also being able to recognize that just because somebody doesn't respond with a no, with a big smile and like, okay, great, I'm glad that you said no to me, doesn't mean that they're going to be mad at us, that they're going to be upset with us, that they're going to exclude us. And I think some of that also comes from the way that we're socialized, right? As humans, we're meant to be in community with each other. And so it can feel really hard if we feel like we're putting that in jeopardy, because every time we say no, if I'm worried that, oh, people aren't going to like me, maybe I'm going to get ostracized from the group, maybe I'm not going to be a go-to anymore, then does that put my need for community in danger? And I always liken it back to, early man, where it was literally life or death. You had to have a community around you because you weren't going to survive on your own. And so I think there is still that kind of primal, primitive instinct inside of us for acceptance of other people.
Yes, 100%. And I notice also with like time management is very important, because when you're saying yes, 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 everything else, that's something that you're not doing for yourself. And so often we neglect ourselves and then forget about ourselves. And then we get mad at ourselves. It's like, what gives, right? So I know that time management and productivity are crucial for anyone, striving to balance personal and professional life. Could you actually share some strategies that perhaps have worked with your clients in managing their time better?
Yeah, so I want to highlight something that you said, and it's something I think about a lot. And the way that I kind of frame it for myself and for others is every no that we are able to say is an opportunity to say yes to something else. And so it's the idea that when I say no, I'm opening the door to a yes. So really getting clear about what are the things I want to say yes to. I think we hear in the world of coaching, in the world of self-improvement, we hear people talk a lot about what are your values? What are your values? What are your values? And so I think it's easy for people to say, oh, well, I value my family. And so then they think, well, if I value my family, then I should show up and say yes to my family all the time because that shows that I value them. Or, oh, I value my career. So that means I need to go hard all the time. And if I need to work overtime 5 nights a week, I should. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think it's important when we get clear about what is important to us, that we also get very clear about who do I want to be and how do I want to show up in this world. And one of the exercises that I learned years ago from Tara Moore, who is the author of the book Playing Big, and she's a coach and a thought leader and just amazing, amazing. I've done multiple courses with her over the years. I really liked her approach to identifying core values. And she talks about finding your core nutrients, the things that really make you feel like you, that make you come alive. And she takes people through this exercise of looking back on peak experiences. Like, when are those times in your life where you felt really alive, really connected to yourself, really, in flow, whatever it is. And I've done that exercise. And you basically think of a couple examples, and then you look at the patterns of, well, what was it that made that thing so wonderful? And I was able to identify some of my values are things like sharing knowledge, right? Helping people, being of service. And so then it's like you look at your life and you say, well, how could I get more of that in my life? But also recognizing that just because being of service is a core value of mine, I also have to find a sense of balance between going too far into serving others and not serving myself. We always have to keep ourselves in that equation. So in terms of practical strategies, I think number one is just really taking the time to think about, what are the things that light me up? What are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that make me feel like me? And then how do I want to show up to do those things or in those situations? So if if your family or being a parent is a core value of yours, is being a good parent, well, don't just stop there. Ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because I think in most cases, people aren't going to say what makes a good parent is being there 24/7 and say yes to everything your kid ever asks you for. I think most good parents would say being a good parent is, modeling good behaviors, modeling healthy behaviors, setting a good example, showing up the way that you want your children to show up and grow up in the world. And so I think sometimes when we dig a little bit deeper, we realize that maybe some of our people-pleasing behaviors are actually not modeling the things that we want to show up for and the ways that we want to show up. I'm a big proponent of writing, so I journal every single morning. I encourage people who like to write to really journal around some of the things that are going on. If there's something in your life where maybe you're struggling to say no, take some time to write about it. See if you can figure out the crux of why you're struggling to say no. because I think sometimes there are things that simmer beneath the surface that we're not even aware of that may be getting in the way, and we have to kind of dig them out from beneath the surface in order to address them. And then the other thing that I think is really important for people who know that they have areas where they want to set boundaries and they know what those boundaries are, but they're not really sure kind of what to say or what to do. First of all, there's, resources out there for that. But also just the idea of it's not a one and done process. So, like I have, I can't remember if I said it to you, I can if I haven't, but I created a resource called the People Pleaser's Guide to Saying No. And it kind of starts folks on that process of how to get started if you're not comfortable saying no, how to build that muscle, how to know kind of what to say no to, what to say, and then how to really respond in those situations, because I think sometimes that's the problem. It's like if I feel like I'm a deer in the headlights and I don't know what to say, especially if I've been socialized to explain things or to give in. But then also to really be able to practice in a low stakes way. And I love using the analogy of the gym, because I think this is an analogy that most people can understand, or a fitness analogy. If you go to the gym and you've never lifted weights before, you're not going to go in and start lifting a 300-pound weight and do it successfully. Right? Nobody's going to go do that. They're going to start with lighter weights and they're going to build up to it. Saying no is the same thing. Setting boundaries is the same thing. I just wrote something this past week and I gave the example of the saying no to your family about spending Christmas with them. That's a really, really high stakes no. If you're not used to setting a boundary or saying no to that is a really not great place to start. Right? Start with like saying no to the neighbor that down the street that you barely know that asks you to, babysit their kids for 12 hours, whatever it is. Try to find things that are going to be easier to say no, to kind of practice the behavior, and then move into situations where maybe you're a little closer to the person, or maybe it's something you've been doing for a lot longer. There's precedent there. So really start with those baby steps. Again, just like you're at the gym building a muscle, you don't start with the 300-pound weight, you start with a 5-pound weight, and then you just, through repetition and practice and time, you build that muscle.
Yes, my mentor, who was a mindset coach, back when in my early phases of sobriety, she told me that she specifically told me that it's the same thing that we were saying earlier. When you do say no to something, you are actually saying yes to something that you enjoy doing. And like you were talking about journaling, I mean, that is something that it's great. Even my son, when talking about little kids, he always like, I want this toy, I want this toy, I want this toy. The old Gina used to be like, okay, let's go get it. Let's go get it. That was the son who's now 16, but my little ones now, it's like, no, honey, you either have to donate a toy or work for it or do something with it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want any more all these toys piled up in our bedrooms and the living rooms and all the rooms around the house. And you wind up stepping on them and hurting your foot with, especially Legos, they hurt.
Yes.
I don't know if you have kids or not, but man, I've had those. Oh, so no, I had to teach them like, hey, no is no, honey. And then they get it. And but my point about confidence is like I wanted to talk about a little bit about confidence, because it does take a lot of confidence for you to say no.
Yes.
And I remember I was just telling you before, I had no confidence whatsoever, and now I'm okay saying no. Now, confidence is the cornerstone of personal development. Can you actually discuss some like techniques or even some practices that help build like lasting self-confidence?
Absolutely. So I want to share a couple of things that I think are really foundational to any mindset practice, but specifically confidence. And I've spoken at length before about confidence and my own journey. And I will just preface this by saying anybody who's listening that feels like they really lack confidence and they don't see themselves ever becoming a confident person, I promise you, with time and effort and the right tools, you absolutely can get there. And when I say time and effort and the right tools, that doesn't mean it has to be laborious and it's not going to take 100 years and it's not going to take many hours a day. These are really simple things that if you do them over time will have a really big impact. So I just want to front load with that. Because I'm somebody that had you told me 10 years ago, some of the things that I believe and feel and ways I show up today, I would not have believed you. So I just want to put that out there. One thing I want to start with is around the idea of affirmations, because I am a big believer of practicing the thoughts that you want to believe. And I have had very much of a love-hate relationship with affirmations. And the reason for that is when I first learned affirmations many, many years ago, people would, talk about affirmations. It was kind of presented to me as this, it was like magic. It was like brain magic. You just say the thing and the thing comes true. And so I would practice and nothing would happen. And I would get so frustrated because I kept hearing about these other people that were doing this and it was working for them and it wasn't working for me. And instead of assuming that the affirmations were the thing that didn't work, I, of course, took it inward and was like, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Everybody else can do this. What's wrong with me? And I really personalized it, which is never a good way to receive things. But then over time, I realized that what I was doing wrong was I was trying to take way too big of a leap. So an example, if you're somebody who really lacks confidence, let's say in your appearance, and you actually look in the mirror and think that you are unattractive, that you would look in the mirror and say, that is an ugly person. If you look in the mirror and say, that's the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life, your brain is most likely going to immediately start saying, no, it's not. Why are you lying? You're such a liar. You're ugly. That's an ugly person in the mirror. So it's almost counterproductive because we're almost triggering our brain to double down on the negative. But if we do a little baby step thought, if we take a thought that's not quite so positive, but not quite so negative, our brain's less likely to do that. And it's also counterintuitive because we think, well, I don't want to just feel a little bit less negative. I want to feel good about myself. But it's like, I like to think about, I come from the world of education. I think about like on a number line, when you go from, negative 20 to positive 20, if you go one increment at a time, you go from negative 20 to negative 19, then negative 18. You don't go from negative 20 to positive 20. You don't jump like that. So thinking about going through all of those different, hash marks on a number line. And so, yes, it is a process and it does take time. But again, it doesn't necessarily take as much time as we would think if we practice it, which is the next piece. So what I like to do is a couple of things. Again, because I'm a big journaler, I do this in writing, but I've had people say to me, Becky, I love this concept, but I hate writing. I don't want to journal. So I always say most people have a smartphone. As far as I don't know about Androids, but I know iPhones, they have that memo button. You just hit that memo button and you can just talk. And that's kind of like a verbal journal, same concept. What I like to do is I like to brain dump whatever it is that I'm dealing with. So let's say I'm not feeling confident in my professional life. I'll write at the top of the paper, whatever the thing is. Maybe there's a big project that I'm working on. Maybe I'm somebody who works in corporate America and we have this big project and I'm the leader of the team and I'm not confident about it. So I might write at the top, like leading team and big project. And then I'm going to bullet out every single thought that I'm having about leading that team. And usually the first handful of thoughts, the first minute or two, it's all going to be stuff that is not surprising to me. It's like, oh yeah, I had that thought at breakfast. That was the thing I said to, my friend last night, whatever it is. And then I'm going to start noticing like, oh, there's some thoughts that I'm writing down that are popping into my head that I didn't actually realize were there. I'm just going to keep writing. And I find when I do this, that eventually there's at least one thought that I suddenly am like, oh, wow, where'd that come from? That's interesting. And that's what I'm going to dig into. And I'm going to look at that thought and see, how is that thought serving me or not serving me? And then how am I going to change that thought? So do you want me to keep going? Because I
Oh
have kind
yeah,
of
I
a,
love this. I
yeah, I
love
was to
this
say,
flow.
I
Keep
feel like
going.
I'm talking a lot, but I want to kind of give people a framework of a tool that we use in coaching, just kind of on a very rudimentary level, so that they can start this process on their own, and then they can, of course, reach out with any questions. So there's this foundational concept in coaching. I've heard it called different things by different coaches from different schools of thought, but it's basically the idea that there's a circumstance or a thing that happens. That circumstance then causes you to have a thought. That thought creates a feeling in your body, and then that feeling determines how you act or don't act, right? It's what you choose to do or not do as a result of how you're feeling. And then that action or inaction is what gets you the result that you're getting. So if I take that thought and I put it into that framework, I can see, okay, the circumstance is this big project at work. If the thought that I discover is I'm ill-equipped to lead this project. Okay, well, when I think that, let me close my eyes. How do I feel in my body? Oh, I feel instantly anxious. Okay, well, what do I do when I'm anxious? Oh, I'm hesitating about making decisions. I'm not stepping up to delegate. And I'll list out all the things I'm doing or not doing. And then what's the result? Oh, the project isn't moving along. So my result is basically proving that thought true. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if I want a different result, I've got to think differently. So I'm going to kind of hack that system. Okay, well, if the result I want is this project is going to move forward successfully, okay, well, what kind of thinking is going to get me to take the kind of action to get that kind of result? So again, I might even start with something like, it's possible that I'm the right person for this job. Or it might be something like, I was chosen for this job for a reason. Okay, well, that thought makes me feel kind of confident. And then what am I going to do moving forward from there? So it's really using that structure, that framework to understand how our thinking can spur us into the kind of action that we want to be taking and the ways that we want to be showing up. Or if we're not showing up to do the things we need to do, really digging into the why behind it and tweaking those thoughts. And again, it could be taking a thought and making it slightly more positive. It could be thinking a new thought. So that's kind of the starting point. But then we have to practice, because if I'm thinking the thought, I'm ill-equipped for this position, I probably have thought that before, especially if it's a hidden thought that I just discovered. It might have been down there for a while. So I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and just forget about it. So what I need to do is I need to practice that new thought, because the old one is still there. So I need to drown out the noise with a new thought, with something that's going to be louder and more top of mind. And again, that's where I go back to, sometimes I will journal and I will write the new thought down. I actually like to record new thoughts that I want to practice. And again, I just put them in a voice memo and I'll repeat them, and then I'll record it. And then when I walk the dogs, I'll play my own voice saying the things that I want to practice. And I'll do it where it's like, oh, I'll make a recording that lasts 5 minutes of me repeating it. And I can just listen to that any random 5 minutes. Oh, I'm taking a walk. Oh, I'm doing the dishes. I'm driving somewhere in the car. And that's the part where I say it takes time and effort, but the effort is not necessarily what we think of. Listening to something in the background while I'm walking is an effort, but it's not something that's hard. And I think that's the important thing to note. Excuse me.
Bless you. Yes, yes. So you brought up many good points, and I remember that I would just listen to affirmations that I had recorded myself, actually, and go walking around the Lake Elizabeth over in Fremont, over here in California, beautiful lake. And I not only am I getting the sun, because we were talking about enjoying the sun, I
Love
was
it.
feeling the breeze, and I was listening to this awesome Gina talking to me. And just feeling good. And like you said, it only takes like 5 minutes. You don't have to do it for like an hour long, whatever.
Yep.
But baby steps. I love the concept of like baby steps. So we were just watching yesterday, literally. What about Bob? I don't know if you remember that movie from the 90s.
Yeah.
And then that doctor had that book, Baby Steps. It's true though. Just take little steps, because you also brought another good point about the gym. We're not going to be lifting that 100-pound or 300-pound weight. We're going to start off with maybe like 5 or 10 and then work our way up. For me, I think my max would be about 10. And I'm good there, but I had to start at 3
Yeah.
pounds, I had to start at 3 pounds. But, and everybody's different. So really listen to your inner self and trust yourself and just develop that good relationship with yourself. And you will see things just change. And how you talk to yourself is very important. You will start believing it because you're loving yourself more and giving yourself that time, that grace, compassion, and also setting boundaries, saying no, and doing things that you love to do. Everything that you talked about is wonderful. I love that. I appreciate it. Now,
Thank
I mean,
you.
you're already probably inspired a lot of our listeners now, and I'm sure they're like, okay, we want to hook up with Becky now. Where can our listeners go ahead and find you?
So the best ways to contact me, I am on social media. I am on Instagram as Becky Upchurch _. I'm on Facebook as Higher Good Coaching, and that's higher with a GH, like higher power. And then email is becky@highergoodcoaching.com. And I always tell people you're welcome to email me. I still check my own email, so it will be me responding.
I know so often people are like, is this a AI responding? What's going? No, it's me. It's
It's
me.
me.
It's me. Yeah. Oh, awesome. But I do have one last question. Can you actually talk about the importance of daily routines in fostering self-care and maybe share like some few examples of routines that have helped your clients transform their lives?
Absolutely. I think it's important. So one of the reasons I think routine is so important is because back to what we were talking about before, doing things with consistency to create change and taking those baby steps. It's the small steps over and over time that are going to yield the big results. And sometimes we think, oh, we're going towards a goal or we're trying to create a change and we need to take these big leaps forward. And the problem with that is usually when we try to do that, we burn out or we set ourselves up for failure. But then what happens when we try to take small steps is sometimes our brain likes to be that inner critic voice that says it's not good enough. And so the ability to consistently show up and do small steps over time. So we start to build that momentum and we start to see successes and we can begin to celebrate those successes. So one thing I really encourage everyone to do, I encourage clients I've worked with to do this: celebrate yourself, celebrate your successes, and plan for that on the front end. I'm actually going to show you something I have here. I wasn't planning on showing it to you, but it's this little book here, and it's Becky's Book of Wins. And I record in this book all kinds of random things that I do that I consider a win, and I record them over time. And this actually does two things for me. Number one, on the days that I'm having a bad day, if I'm feeling bad, if I'm doubting myself, I can pull out this book, open it to any page, and read about something awesome that I've done. Like, I will tell you, the very first entry in this book is from when I graduated from my coach training. And so, which, always, like, every time I open it to the first page and I see that, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that time in my life when I decided to take this journey. But what it also does, excuse me, I'm allergic to everything right now.
I
What
know,
it
me too.
also does is it teaches our brain to look for wins. And we want to do that. We want to teach our brain what to look for, not what not to look for. So always feeding it things that we want to look for the positive. Um, and so I think that is a routine that I highly encourage people to do, to look at each day. What is a win that I had? What is something I can celebrate? What is something I did well? Even if it's, before you go to bed at night, here's one thing I'm grateful for today. And here's something that I did to have an impact, whether it be towards one of my goals, for another person, to help me live the life I want, whether it's related to that win, but just to really start celebrating and recognizing the positive, because that's going to build that positive momentum. I also think I am right now, my sleep schedule is a little bit off because I have a dog who has somehow her sleep schedule has changed. So she now wakes us up at like 4:15 in the
Oh,
morning.
wow.
So we're working through that. But people say this all the time, and I know it can be difficult, but I think some of the most important daily habits are sometimes the easiest things if we just focus on them. So sleep and water. I cannot tell you what a game changer it has been to me to be fully rested, at least 7 hours of sleep. I personally prefer 8. And to be fully hydrated. And it sounds so simple and so silly, but I can tell you, on days when I have not done those things, I can absolutely feel it in my body. I can feel it in my brain, the way I focus, the way I show up. So really just making sure that we're taking care of some of those fundamental foundational things. I also think, movement, getting outside. I'm fortunate that I have dogs. So even in the winter, when this summer baby does not want to leave the house, my dogs force me to go outside, get some fresh air, get some movement in. So I think all of those things are super important kind of universally. But then I also encourage folks to think about what are the things that really light me up and bring me joy, and how can I get those more into my day? And it can be in a really small way. So maybe you're somebody who loves to dance. You can dance for 5 minutes around your living room, right? It doesn't have to be, I think sometimes we think about, oh, I don't have time to do that thing I love to do. And we don't think about the impact of very small pockets of time. So I always encourage people, find 5 minutes, because 5 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're doing something for 5 minutes that brings you joy, it can definitely shift your mood. And if you're finding 5 minutes a day to do something you enjoy, I think you'd be amazed at, over time, how that can impact you.
Yeah, just 5 minutes. So, I mean, people are like, it's so easy. We just got to do it and put it into action. That's what counts. It could be in our mind and we're
Yeah,
thinking about it, but really putting it into action makes a difference. And then building slowly into that as routine. And then it just becomes part of your life.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Becky. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to share, or any last final words or thoughts?
I think, again, to me, it goes back to, I always think about that person who may be listening and who may be in a place where maybe they're having a bad day, or they're feeling defeated, or maybe they've, were working towards a goal and fell off of it. You can always start again, and you can always keep going. And I know something I've had to learn in my own life, because, I tell people all the time, when you meet a coach, if that coach tells you that they have it all together, they have all the answers, and they're, living the perfect life, I would be highly suspect of that.
Are they even human?
Right, exactly. Because I think that the human condition is in part that we always fall short and fail, because we tend to set high expectations for ourselves. And I think the key is to give ourselves grace, and to use the tools that we have, and to use the experts that have tools for us, and all of those things. Use the people in our lives that can support us. So I think a lot of times, though, we set ourselves up for unrealistic expectations. And then when we fall short, or maybe they're realistic expectations and life happens, or we get tired, or we just don't do it, we spend a lot of time focused on beating ourselves up. And we spend a lot of time and mental energy on that piece of it. And if we use that time and mental energy on, okay, well, how am I going to get started again and not beat myself up? Or how am I going to take that next baby step? How am I going to become a cheerleader for myself, because maybe that's the piece that's missing? Or how am I going to build in some accountability, because that's what I'm lacking? So really kind of turning to that lens of, if I'm in a place where I need to push forward, letting go of judgment, leading into curiosity and problem solving to help me move forward. So that would kind of be, I guess, the biggest last thought that I want to leave folks with.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for being on my show, Becky. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. This was great.